Gurv Magat, Las Cian O'Callaghan, and firstly I want to join with the others in terms of welcoming everyone that's here in the gallery and everyone who's watching this. And I want to make a few points firstly on where Deputy O'Riordan finished off about this never ever happening again. Now we had, this afternoon we had the National Building Control Office and Market Surveillance Office, the National Safety Authority of Ireland, and we had the Department of Housing in on the issue of quarries and defective materials. And two things from that which shouldn't be the situation if all of us are 100% committed to this never happening again. Firstly is we couldn't get a clear answer from the department as to how many people are working in building control around local authorities in Ireland. Now, when myself and other deputies put written questions into the Minister about that, and this is a very important thing, how many people are working in making sure that this never happens again? How many people are working in inspecting new developments, new buildings? This is something that the Minister and the Department should be absolutely interested in, should have oversight in, should be very concerned about, and yet the response we get back is, well, we don't keep that kind of information. Now, if we're all committed to this, the very least we should have is oversight of that at a national level, and we should have full information on that. The second thing of note from the committee this afternoon is the issue around the resources on building control and for the National Building Control Office, who are doing excellent work. And in as much as any public agency will ever say this, because they're under pressure not to say this, but as much as they can say it, was clarity again today that they, in terms of doing that job really well, and they're highly committed to it, that they are a very small team and they could be resourced better. I mean, you think of the absolute devastation and stress this is done to individuals and families, and the billions of euro on costs on this. It's inexplicable that that level, the National Building Control Office and the Market Surveillance Office, which does very important work, would be under-resourced. So that has to be addressed. In terms of accountability for developers, and others have talked about this, I mean, there's one thing that could be done now if the government was serious about accountability on developers, and we have seen this. Some of the developers who made huge profits from this, selling homes, marketing them, and marketing an entire lifestyle that goes with them, made huge profits, then shut down the companies once there's a difficulty with this, set up a new company, and some of those are making huge profits again. Cairn Homes was referenced earlier. Their operating profits this year are predicted to run to €100 million, and revenue in Cairn Homes increased by 84% in the first 6 months of this year, to just give an example of one large developer in Ireland. One thing that could be done now to ensure that people can no longer hide behind company law is to actually change it in terms of residential construction, and make sure that directors are accountable for what the companies do in terms of their companies, even if they wind up the company. That's not a get out of jail clause card for them. That would put a bit of accountability into the system. Second thing would be to ensure that developers would have to have latent defects insurance in order to operate and in order to build again. I had amendments down in legislation that was passed by the government over the last year to that effect. Fortunately, the government didn't support my amendments on that. But if there was latent defects insurance as a requirement, that would mean anyone who's building shoddy homes simply would not be able to get insurance. That would put them out of the system and would provide some support for residents who are caught in that situation. I think there has been some good discussion here last Cian O'Callaghan in terms of the timeframes about this, and there is huge urgency on this. People's lives are on hold, and it's very difficult when people are dealing with this and all the stress around it to progress with the other aspects of your life. Very, very difficult, and there is an urgency on it. No one is asking for a rushed job in this. We want this done properly, but we want this done as quickly as possible. I think there's agreement that this should be done on a statutory basis and put in place legislation. I haven't heard anyone argue otherwise, but that should be done as quickly as we can. These mistakes were done by rushed building. These mistakes were done by a sticking plaster attitude to construction, and there's no reason why we can't have a robust response quickly to it that is well worked out. And I think, you know, a lot of these issues arose 10 years ago, more than 10 years ago. It is 3 years almost now since the last election. So to expect that there would be measures in place now, I don't think is to expect too much in terms of urgency in terms of dealing with this. Just in terms of what needs to happen, I want to make a few points. There's been excellent proposals put forward last Cian O'Callaghan from the Construction Defects Alliance and the Apartment Owners Network. And in terms of remediation and the urgency of it, they made that point. I think another point is that inclusion is very important in this, and it is very important in terms of retrospective measures that anyone who has already carried out works at huge cost should be included in the scheme, otherwise it's blatantly unfair. I think it's very important also to think about this in terms of apartment complexes and how they're run and through the volunteer directors on the OMCs, and the huge difficulties they already have, a lot of them, in terms of collecting management fees and running the management companies, and how putting this burden on them on top of that is a huge burden. So the scheme, the remediation scheme, has to be one that faces the reality that they're in, faces the reality that some of them already have difficulty collecting management fees. So if it's a scheme that excludes some of the homes, excludes some of the owners, that will make this unworkable for some of the OMCs. So in terms of the Minister's comments about how far it's extended, I do think there is a need for upfront funding in terms of an apartment block, and then you know, for any of the multi-unit owners, then trying to find a way to claw that back through the taxation system would be the way to do that, because partial funding for most just won't work, and then it means this will drag on for years more and just puts the volunteers running those OMCs under even more pressure. And as the Minister is aware, in some places, because of all the stress around this, the directors have resigned, which leaves the OMC then in a weaker position. Then new directors may come in with less experience, and all the issues that creates. I do think there's a very strong case that this should be run like the Power Right Board. That is a good model. We should be learning from their experience and the expertise built up, and I think it can be more cost effective as well if this is done where the repairs are run by the Power Right Board or a successor board, rather than putting all of that responsibility onto the OMCs. And in terms of interim measures, we've heard from the Minister that he's going to bring forward interim measures. I think we would like to know when will they be brought forward, especially given that they're interim. And we would like to know, in terms of the timelines on this, when is the legislation going to come true? When is the scheme going to be up and running? And I think that's the least that people who are in this situation deserve, is concrete information on that from the Minister in terms of their lives being on hold. I think, last Cian O'Callaghan, just to conclude on this point, I mean, take a look at our housing system in Ireland. People pay some of the highest prices in Europe for homes. Developers make huge profits. The regulation system has been incredibly weak. Even now, I don't feel, and especially from what we heard today, that everything is being done to ensure that we don't have a repeat of this. Yes, there's been improvements in regulation, but are we doing our best in terms of regulation? Do we have independent inspections in place? Do we have a national building control agency that is needed? No, we don't. Do we have the requirement for latent defects insurance? No, we don't. Do we have those changes in company law to hold directors of construction companies that do this to account so they can't hide behind closing down a company? No, we don't. So there are immediate things that should be done now to rectify that. Gurb Margaret.